and is a professional agrologist. Shannon has over 15 years of experience planning, implementing, and evaluating composting and waste diversion programs and policies in collaboration with municipal and territorial governments, Indigenous governments, nonprofit organizations, and farmers. She is self-employed and currently works with communities in Alberta, BC, and the Northwest Territories, including projects here in the Bow Valley. Shannon is a mom of 2 children. We have a special guest and assistant here, ages 5 and 8, and loves composting and gardening adventures that she now enjoys with them. So let's welcome Shannon.
Thanks so much. Thank you so much to each of you for being here. And again, I would like to thank the library for having these great events. I know I've come to a number of these presentations myself and learned so much every time. Thank you to the museum for reaching out about this particular topic, and to Grace, who's come as a volunteer to help with the soil trivia game on the side here. So really grateful to all these organizations, so to Tanya and to Biosphere for the idea of, I think, coming up with this idea of the Earth Talks to begin with. Thank you to all of you for coming out tonight. I know composting, it's not always top on people's radar of things to learn about, but I know myself, I'm really passionate about it. And I find it to be a really interesting topic, more than what you might think about on the surface. And I'm looking forward to going through the journey tonight with you of when we have food scraps here in the Bow Valley, how it is that they become compost when we participate in our municipal composting programs. Just a quick start, can everyone hear me? I know that we don't have a mic tonight at the back, is that all right? Okay, I'll make sure that I speak up. So first off, major thanks to the Canmore Museum. I was so excited last fall when I got an email from Sarah Fletcher, who's here tonight. She works with the museum, saying that they had a new exhibit that was coming called Soil Superheroes. And being the soil nerd I am, and there's not so many of us, I was very excited that there was such an exhibit coming to our own community. It's come here to us from the Canada Agriculture and Food Museum in Ottawa, and it's here until later in May. Have any of you had a chance to go check out the exhibit yet? You want to put up your hand? And it's okay if you haven't, you still have a few months to do so. So I would really encourage you to go check it out. It's really neat. It basically looks into the lives of all these different types of microorganisms that we don't think about very often because they're tiny, but that help make soil alive and help soil do all of the amazing things it does for us, including providing our food, many of our building materials, and even things like antibiotics that we use to cure our ailments. So the exhibit's really well done. It's great for kids right through to adults. And if you haven't checked it out, I would really encourage you to do so. And so the link in tonight to this topic is that exhibit is talking about soil superheroes. And really the whole composting process is thanks to soil and compost superheroes. And so tonight we're going to talk about how is it that our food scraps can go from how do they become compost? I want to ask each of you, what do you think, what are the main reasons why we compost? Why do we compost? What would be a few main reasons or benefits of producing compost? You can either put up your hand or you can just yell it out.
Lessen the landfill.
Lessen the landfill, absolutely.
Valuable products from the garden.
Absolutely, a great product that we can put on our garden rather than just having those materials end up in the landfill. Yep.
Free soil for our indoor plants.
Yes, free soil for our indoor plants. I'm repeating so the people on Zoom can hear the answers. Absolutely, a great soil amendment for our plants. Hal? Thank you, Hal, from the Bow Valley Clean Air Society. Yes, and we'll talk about that in the presentation. It's a really important benefit that maybe 20 years ago we didn't talk about so much, but the more we learn about it, it's actually a really amazing benefit of composting. And I feel like every year, as we understand methane gas more, we realize how even more and more how important composting is. Totally. Naya? To feel part of the cycle, absolutely. And that word cycle is so important. When we throw things out into the landfill, it's like a linear path. We use something, and then it goes into the landfill. Basically, the resources that were in that thing are lost. Whereas with composting, we're part of the cycle, and we're able to, the nutrients and the organic matter that are in those food scraps through composting go back into the soil again and can be used to produce more plants. Yeah, fantastic work, everyone. You nailed them all. So yeah, there's a lot of reasons why we, not wanting to bring up the text. There we are. Lots of reasons why we compost, and you hit all of all of the main ones here. And so I'm going to go through each of these just briefly. One thing I wanted to ask, we talk about reducing waste. So over the last couple of years, both the communities of Canmore and Banff have done what are called waste characterization studies, which is like basically having a set of people, including Naya, who is here in the room. She helped with the Canmore waste study, a few other community members, basically collecting a sample of garbage, separating it into about 40 different categories and seeing what's in there. So in these studies, we're able to understand what is in the garbage in our communities. So I want you to guess what proportion, and it's pretty similar in the residential sector between Canmore and Banff, of what's still in our garbage bins, what proportion do you think is made up of compostable materials that could have gone to the compost facility? You can just shout it out. 25%. 55? 35%. Any other guesses? Now, so it is since the compost bins are in place right now. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm just going to stop there because that was very close, 35% in Banff. So I'm going to speak about Banff's numbers because they're public numbers. The report's gone to council and anyone can take it and look at it. So we'll look at the next slide here. So the Banff waste characterization study was done in late 2022. 37% in Banff and this is actually townwide in Banff, I believe. 37% of what's in the garbage could have been composted. So food scraps, food soiled paper. 15% was recyclable materials, and 9% were things that could have been reused, taken to the thrift store, things like toys, clothing, shoes, things that didn't really need to go to the landfill. And about 40% of the materials in there really were things that at the moment we can't reuse or recycle or compost. So I would like to acknowledge both the towns of Canmore and Banff have great programs for diversion, have recycling programs, have composting programs in place, as Councillor Graham mentioned. So we've already made good strides and there's a lot of material being diverted. This data shows us there's just a lot more opportunity still existing. And that's part of even why we're talking about this tonight. We've come a long way, especially quick in some communities. Like the change, say here in Canmore, it's just been since 2019 that we have an organics diversion program. And already in the town of Canmore, 1 ton a day of organics from the residential sector is going to the compost facility. You can see the numbers here at the bottom. So for Banff, currently, there's about 18 tons a month of food scraps that are diverted and 215 tons a month from the commercial sector. And in Canmore, about 30 tons a month from each of the residential and commercial sectors that's going to the compost facility. So as I mentioned, the way that we've discovered this is through a waste characterization study. Naya, who's in the room, is in the photo on the top right there. We had a few other community members, Cheryl Glegg, who helped, other people who helped out in sorting the trash into the 40 different categories. It's quite an interesting process. It's really interesting to see what is in the stream, and it really gives you a sense of where the opportunities are to divert more. As you might imagine, there's also some interesting little like psychology tidbits of a society. I didn't realize that so many people don't eat their pizza crusts. That for me was the interesting learning, separating everything out right down to the last item. So here, both for Canmore and Banff, when we do throw things in the garbage, does anyone know the name of the landfill where our material goes to? Elliot. Oh, good one, Elliot. You know, the materials from construction and demolition waste totally go to the Exshall landfill. You're right, to the Francis Cook facility. Good one, Elliot. And then the garbage, like say from the residential garbage bins, goes to a different spot that's quite a lot farther away, actually. It might be surprising to people. It goes to a place called the West Dried Meat Lake Landfill. It's in Camrose County. So it's about 350 kilometers from here, near Camrose, and it gets put in the landfill. So once it goes into the landfill, there's very little air in a landfill. As you can imagine, everything's all piled up. And because there's no air in there, decomposition takes a very long time. So even something like a carrot, I remember going to a presentation many years ago as a compost conference. A person showed that there'd been part of the landfill that was dug up, and there was a carrot that had been in there for 7 years, and you could still, it looked exactly like the carrot that had gone in. It was remarkable to me. So just very little decomposition happening because there's not good habitat for the microorganisms that do decomposition. But then when decomposition does happen, it generally creates methane gas. And the reason that is because there's no air in the landfill. So if decomposition of something like a carrot happens in the presence of oxygen, it's generally done by microorganisms that need oxygen to survive, and they generally produce carbon dioxide. And the thing with methane that's challenging is that it's much, much worse greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So on a long time frame, it's about 28 times worse than carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas. And so currently right now, landfills in Canada generate about 23% of Canada's methane emissions. So that's a lot. It's a really big component, and it's something the federal government is really working on, and people are working on, provincial governments, municipal governments. It's, as Hal mentioned, it's one of the reasons why it's really important to try and keep our food scraps and organics out of the landfill. So this is just a fun little clip from Metro Vancouver that reinforces this point.
What brings you in today?
Well, it's kind of embarrassing.
Describe your symptoms.
I keep emitting this gas.
Oh, yeah, that's bad.
What is it, Doc?
It's okay. That's a potent greenhouse gas.
What can I do? The other food scraps are talking.
Stay out of the landfill. You're a food scrap. When you go in the green bin, you become nutrient-rich compost. Carbon neutral, no methane.
Thanks, Doc.
Food scraps aren't garbage.
So yay, Metro Vancouver, they make these videos available to anyone, other municipalities. As you'll notice, even the educational materials here in Canmore, the googly-eyed characters are from Metro Vancouver. They shared them for free with the town of Canmore to be able to use, which is awesome, because for a smaller community, it's hard to have the budget to come up with these characters, but they're super fun, and it's always good to try and think of fun ways to encourage people to participate in these programs. So
What brings you?
sorry. So we wanted to keep organics out of the landfill to prevent methane. Also, as Naya mentioned, we want to complete the circle. So we think of, there's an image here of a family sitting and having a meal. We have our food scraps after the meal. If we send them to the compost, in the case of here in the Bow Valley, they go to a farm where they're composted, and then they're used as a soil amendment on the farm to produce more food. And it's then a cycle that produces more food that can come back to us again. So now we're going to really jump on the journey of what happens with our food scraps here in the Bow Valley. So step one of the journey to being composted is to collect the materials. So there's some photos here of a number of different community members collecting their food scraps and taking them to the bin, whether it's here in Canmore or in Banff. Now, we might collect some of the food scraps at home and take them to our residential bin. There's also collection happening in a lot of different businesses and in institutions in our community. So in businesses and institutions here in Canmore, this is a photo of one of the 240-liter bins. This particular one is one that would be indoors. It's not wildlife proof. So if a restaurant has an indoor space. Also around town, you might see in some of the back alleys, there are large versions of this that have a wildlife proof latch. They're rated as bear resistant. They literally have, they're tested through the Interagency Grizzly Bear Committee. They're put in an enclosure with grizzly bears in BC and left there for a number of hours with tasty meat inside. And if the bears can't get in, they're rated as bear resistant and can be used in communities like ours in a safe way. So because obviously we want to compost, we have to do it in a way that keeps our wildlife safe and reduces the potential for human wildlife conflict. So we have these bins. This photo in the middle is just from on the weekend at the World Cup up at the Nordic Center. So yay, Biosphere Institute for helping to set up the diversion, both the organics diversion, but also recycling up there. And yay, this lovely volunteer who's helping to guide people and where they should put their materials. And here on the right is just an image inside the back of a grocery store where someone is preparing a fruit tray, and then putting the food scraps into the bin. So lots of different places in their communities where this is happening. There's a lot of different things that can go in the compost bin. I'm going to you can probably read some of this. It's maybe small. What are some of the things that you put in food scraps container at home or that you know that you can put in your compost bin? You can just shout them out.
Grease and fat.
Grease and fat. Yeah, that's one of the questions. Anybody else? Pizza crust. Yes. Pizza boxes. Yeah, that's one. That's one of the ones that are maybe a little bit, less common to people. Pizza boxes can go in, especially the bottom part that's greasy. If the top is clean, if you have a pizza box and the top part is clean, you can rip it off and put it in the recycling if you wish, and put the bottom greasy part in the compost, or you can put the whole thing in the compost. Either way totally works, whatever feels easier. But any type of cooked or raw food And that includes meat, dairy, bones. If you have a whole bunch of milk, I wouldn't put your whole jug of milk in, that'll get sloppy for you, but yogurt, a little bit of milk would be fine. Little bits of grease from cooking, like bacon fat, can all go in your compost if you're not able to reuse them yourself. Food soil paper, that's one people don't always think of. So napkins, tissue, if you have a cold and you're blowing your nose a lot, all that can go in the compost. Hair from brushing your hair. Tea bags, provided that the tea bag's not that nasty nylon, those ones that are new, the nylon can't go in, but as long as it's paper, and the coffee grounds can go in. So there's a lot of different things from our homes and our businesses, and especially our restaurants, that can go in the compost bin. One thing I always like to make note of is, so in our compost programs, both in Canmore and Banff, you're allowed to use certified compostable bags. So if it feels easier at home, you don't have to. If you just want to collect your food scraps into a container, we have, actually wanted to make a note, we have some kitchen catchers. Thank you, Town of Canmore. If anyone needs one of these for home, we have a few that Simon has given to this event so that we can pass on to people. Or if you know of someone who needs one who's not here tonight, you can go and pick one up from the Civic Center. So Town of Canmore makes these available to people for free. They just want to help you be able to start composting at home. When you go to put things in here, you can either just put them straight in. You can just line that with newspaper and then dump the whole thing in afterwards. You can make your own. I know at our house, we just use a 5-gallon pail because for us, we find that's easier to fill it right up and then take it to the bin. Or you can use one of these ones from Canmore. If you wish, you can use a certified compostable bag as a liner. So basically you can then pick the whole thing up and put it in the compost bin. When you go to purchase these bags, it's unfortunate. It's really tricky in the marketplace around these bags right now. Certified compostable bags are great and they will decompose properly at the compost facility. Biodegradable bags will not. It's so unfortunate because really, from a scientific perspective, to biodegrade means to decompose and it would be fine. It's just that there's a lot of false advertising going on right now. The federal government is working on this. Hopefully within a year or two, there will be legislation to really clear this up and there will be less greenwashing and like intentional confusion in the marketplace. But for now, if you're looking for a bag or any kind of item, whether you're at a fast food takeout and someone's giving you a container and says it's compostable, just look for the little logo, the logos that you can see on the screen here that say certified compostable. To confuse matters worse, the Biodegradable Products Institute certifies the compostability. But just look for even the top or the bottom logos that say certified compostable, and then you can rest easy knowing that they will decompose. I worked for many years at the compost facility in Yellowknife. It was amazing. These bags would come in looking like this. Within 2 or 3 weeks, we couldn't even tell they'd ever existed. It really does work. It sometimes you look at it and it seems like it would be surprising, but as long as they're certified compostable, it totally works. Something like this is a biodegradable bag. So these are the bags that are in the dog waste dispensers around town here in Canmore. These are not compostable. So it says at the bottom 100% biodegradable, but that means they can't go in the compost. So yeah, if you just watch for those logos, and same, like I say, if you get a takeout container from a restaurant, just watch for those logos as well. I generally say to people, if you don't see the logo, don't put it in the bin, unless it's like a China lily paper plate that's literally just paper, or like something like a paper bag that you know is just paper, and then it can go in. Oh, that's a great question, Naya. It's an excellent question. Dog poop is compostable and many facilities accept it. It's interesting right now because I think the compost facility where Canmore's material is going to and Banff's material is going to they will accept pet waste. The two communities so far haven't accepted it in their program. So when you look at the list, it will say no pet waste. And that's something that's been a decision on the part of the two municipalities, but it would be possible. But it's not currently technically accepted. So yeah, they would accept it. Totally. And yeah. Totally.
So like regardless of pet waste there, the soil we get back
there could be a small amount in there. Yeah, there could be a small amount in there. It's really interesting because I think there's sometimes an ick factor. I think sometimes that's one of the reasons people don't want, they're like, oh, people are going to be grossed out by it. It's really interesting. We'll go through the process of composting, and at a large compost facility, it gets so hot and they have to follow very specific procedures that any of the pathogens that could have been present are killed, which is why, say you might not want to, you definitely wouldn't want to compost, say, your dog poo in Canmore. We can't compost in our backyard, but if you're in a community where you could, if you did that on a backyard scale and it was hard to get high temperatures, you wouldn't want to put it on your food plants, for example. You could maybe put it on your shrubs in your yard, but you wouldn't want to put it on your food plants because there could be the chance of fecal coliforms or something like that getting into, contaminating your food. In the case of these big compost facilities, it's so hot and it's managed in such a way that all of the pathogens are done. As an example, like compost facilities are used to compost, like when there's been avian influenza in BC, composting is what's used to deal with the chickens afterwards. Like there's a lot of composting can be used for a lot of things to get rid of pathogens. So yeah, that's a really interesting question. I appreciate that.
Is it safety testing?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point, to make sure at the end that yes, the product is safe coming back to people to use it. Yeah. Dave? They just break down into smaller pieces of plastic. So they're actually, I would say in many ways, worse than just regular plastic, because they just break into smaller pieces of plastic, which then causes plastic contamination if they're out in the environment. Yeah, and they're not recyclable. So I have trouble seeing the purpose of biodegradable bags, to be honest. That's what they are made of. Yeah. 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 Great question. It's actually quite interesting because there's a few different chemical processes used to make compostable bags. Some are made from corn, so from all natural materials. Some are still made from petroleum products. It's interesting, but they've been formulated in a way that they do genuinely decompose completely at the end, in the composting environment. It's a great question. So there's both types out there, and there's actually quite interesting research even on the life cycle. Like you can't always assume just because it's made of corn that it's automatically better for the environment necessarily. Each situation is a little bit distinct. So yeah. Wade.
So is it, we don't put our dog poop in the compost because of the bags that we're currently buying? Is that correct? I'm not sure why that, like in terms of the communities. I think it's maybe been more concern around public perception of the pet waste, I think. Yeah, or maybe not, like in the handling, maybe. Yeah, because it is possible. Yeah. But and I recognize, if the choice was made to include it in the program, so say Nova Scotia is really far ahead in Canada in terms of waste diversion. They include pet waste. They've recognized it's especially our community, it's like a fairly big proportion of the, relatively speaking, of the waste stream. We have lots of animals, companion animals here. It could be included. We would have to probably remove the biodegradable bags because it would reduce. I think there is some concern around contamination sometimes in people choosing the biodegradable bags, but with good education, there is a way to address that. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, those are available too. Totally. So we looked at that.
It might have been. Yeah, that's possible that it is quite a lot more expensive. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't realize. I knew biodegradable was pretty much. I just didn't realize how it was, and now I understand.
Totally. Yeah, it's tricky, these things. Like, yeah, Hal? It's a great question. Yeah. Yeah, and often our systems haven't, that's a lot of level of detail. It's hard for our systems sometimes to assess these things that way. Totally.
Cheaper, but
yeah.
If you were to use a compostable bag for your regular garbage, and in the landfill, how would that compostable bag, because the landfill is like you said, there's no air, would that break down better than in the landfill? Because you have to put a bag around your regular garbage. Would it be better to use a compostable bag than IGA bag?
I totally understand. Oh man, such a good question. That's a really interesting one. I would say, and this is it might seem surprising, I would say to use a plastic bag. If you can, just one that
it's come into your household because you ended up with it from something else, if you can repurpose one. There's some really interesting life cycle assessments around different bags. So compostable bag, regular plastic bag, and paper bag. And it's interesting, there's more resources that tend to go into making certified compostable plastics. So kind of the consensus out of some of that research is if you're using certified compostable items, including the bags or containers, say for single use, like say food, if you're using it to help organics get into the compost stream, it's generally worthwhile from an overall environmental perspective. But if it's not facilitating that, you're better off to just to have a plastic, which is surprising. Yeah.
Is that the plastic also life cycle wise better than a paper bag?
Oh, I can't answer that one off the top of my head. That's a good question. I'm not sure. And then I think the plastic, like saving the federal legislation around plastic bags and not paper, was related to plastic contamination in the oceans and other issues with plastic. So I know it's quite the rabbit hole when you go down some of these ones, and the answers they're not always what you expect, which is good too, right? Like it's learning and when you get into these things. But yeah, I'm not sure that paper versus plastic, Naya. I don't know the answer off the top of my head. I can send you the link. I'll try and remember to do that, of where these studies are, because they're super detailed. They're very well done. It was through the the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality. They did these really thorough studies, which are awesome in themselves because they're very well done. So yeah. Amazing questions, everyone. Thank you. Because I guess the image here is basically there are 24 food scraps collection bins in Canmore. Way to go, Canmore. So 2019, this program started, I believe, with 5 collection points to begin with. The town has really increased the number of bins quickly. That's really quick for a community. Those bins, it takes resources to set them up. And way to go, Town of Canmore residents who've really stepped up and are now diverting 1 ton a day from the program. There's opportunity for a lot more, but people have really stepped up. They're interested. One thing I can speak to in general terms, even from the waste audit, the organics being diverted are really clean. People are doing an awesome job. The people who are choosing to compost and put their materials in the bins are doing a great job. So way to go. Keep up the good work. So. And then Town of Banff has also done a lot of work over the last few years to really increase the number of bins. In about 2015, 2016, there were 5 bins in Banff, and now there are 48 residential food waste collection bins in Banff. So 2018, Banff had kind of a strategy around how they wanted to divert more waste. And in that, one of the actions that came out of that was really increasing the number of food waste collection bins and residential recycling bins in Banff. So we've collected up the materials. They're in the residential bin or in the commercial bin. The lovely staff in our 2 communities collect those materials. And then they were put into long haul trucks and taken on their journey to the compost facility, which we've spoken about. And as I mentioned, the compost facility is, maybe I didn't mention this before, I mentioned where the landfill was, that it's in Camrose. The compost facility is called Stickland Farm, and it is located near Red Deer. So it's still a fair journey. It's about 218 kilometers from Canmore. And often I've heard a number of times people say, oh man, like why don't we have our own compost facility right here in the valley? It would be closer. We wouldn't have to use these trucks to take it so far. And it's a good point, and it would be awesome if there was a compost facility closer that could handle our items. But there's an interesting story behind this. When Banff first started its compost program about 15 years ago, they had their own compost facility. It was right down by the wastewater treatment plant. They're producing category A, super high quality compost. One of the biggest challenges for them is that there wasn't enough market in the Bow Valley for that compost to go somewhere. Parks Canada wouldn't let them apply it to reclamation projects in the park. It was hard for them to understand why it was category A, but they didn't want that applied in the park. And they basically didn't have a market. There were, obviously there are gardeners amongst us here in Banff and in Canmore, but we only need so much in our community gardens and our home gardens. Here in the Bow Valley, we just don't have a lot of large scale agriculture. It's not one of our economic activities in this area. And so over time, the town of Banff started taking their compost, their food scraps to a compost facility out in kind of in central Alberta. And then as Canmore started its program, it has done the same. One of the things I found really interesting, so from a greenhouse gas perspective, thinking of the transportation, this graph on the right, so the Environment and Climate Change Canada has a great calculator for looking at what are the emissions associated with different waste management options. And so this graph here on the right, baseline is what happens when we send food scraps to the landfill. So this is the data from the Bow Valley. So when we send it to Camrose, that graph there, the orange are the methane emissions coming out of that landfill from the greenhouse gas emissions. And the green is the transportation related emissions. So there are some transportation emissions. Ultimately, they're quite small in relation to ultimately the impact of putting the food scraps in the landfill and having all that methane generated. The little bar on the right is if we take those food scraps and we send them to the compost facility, it's still 218 kilometers away. It's still a fair distance. The green again is the transportation to get the organics to the compost facility. The little blue lines you're seeing there are process energy, what some of they'll use equipment at the compost facility to make the compost. But ultimately, the overall greenhouse gas emissions are much, much, much lower than if those same food scraps had gone to the landfill. And so one thing I often think about is, yes, it would be great if we could find a compost facility that was closer. But as a municipality and as our communities, we ultimately have limited resources that we're trying our very best to do all the things we need to do for our community with those resources. I look at this graph and what it tells me is that right at the moment, when we know we still have 37% of our garbage consisting of food scraps, we should just do our darndest to get more of those food scraps out of the garbage and into the compost stream, probably before we worry too much about exactly where the compost facility is located. That makes sense. If an opportunity came up and there was one closer, great, but really the really major environment greenhouse gas saving is from getting those food scraps out of the garbage and into the compost. And so the next farm, this is where the organics go to. This is Stickland Farm. This photo is from the Stickland family. I literally had a conversation this past week. It's a really neat family. There's Edna, who's probably in her 70s or 80s, I think now. And then the next generation, her son Brian, who are making the compost at their farm. And the materials arrive there, and then we're going to go through some of these next photos. This photo is from the Stickland family. The photos next, I used to work at the Yellowknife compost facility. So most of my photos of compost processing are from that experience. So the first thing that happens, and this will happen at Stickland Farm, I chatted with Edna, and very common at compost facilities, one of the major challenges is plastic, is people putting plastic in and having to take it out. So literally there'll be somebody on the other end, either with equipment or manually. I've been in this position that my friend and colleague Kim here is, where you're literally pulling the plastic bags out of the compost that people have put in. You're taking out little metal cups from restaurants. You're like pulling the big stuff out. And then later it'll go through the composting process. I know at Stickland Farm, they have some blowers, they use screeners, they're using technology as well to remove contaminants. This photo on the right is quite an interesting one. There's a gentleman in the Yukon who is an agricultural engineer, very creative, very inventive. He has created and patented a special, he calls it the Compost Liberator, a machine. He started out with an old street sweeper from Whitehorse, and he made this machine to take especially plastics out of compost. And now he's selling it to communities across North America. So there's technological ways to take out the contaminants and some handwork as well. So the food scraps arrive there. And then really the next task at the compost facility is trying to make an environment that is really ideal for all of the little tiny microorganisms, our compost superheroes who are going to do the decomposition. So the food scraps come in, they are really high in nitrogen. And the organisms that are going to do all the hard work of the decomposition, they need both nitrogen and carbon. And they also need air. So we end up mixing in, most compost facilities will mix in wood chips, shredded paper, sources of higher carbon material in with the food scraps to make a mixture that's really conducive to good life for these microorganisms. So go ahead.
Sorry, it is relevant to this particular slide. What percentage of food scraps to wood chips, shredded paper?
Great question. And there's whole like compost recipes that, and there's even great calculators online if you're wanting to play around with this. It with food scraps, like as a really general rule by volume, you'd have 3 parts like wood chips, shredded paper to 1 part food scraps. You'll play around with it a bit. Like I'm not sure for Sticklands, they might have some manure and straw from their farm they may be mixing in. They actually take all the biosolids from our wastewater treatment plant as well. So they will have a mixture that will be incorporating things. I don't know if they compost those 2 things separately or together. I'm not sure how they're doing that. Sometimes that's done. Those things are done separately. It's a great question. Kind of 3 to 1 by volume is a really general thumb, but they'll have probably a more precise mixture than that potentially. So yeah, we mix up the materials. What are the main things we need as people to like to meet our basic needs? What do we need? Oxygen, water, heat, shelter, calories, food. Yes, you got it. So all the little microorganisms, they have the exact same needs. So we're going to meet a couple of them, and a few of these
I literally, this is from the agriculture, the exhibit that's at the museum right now. We have all of these great microorganisms that we're wanting to really make a great home for. The exhibit is hilarious. I enjoyed it a lot. I've got the character number 2, Professor Leaf, Dr. Dunn, all the organisms that work really hard and then get decompose themselves. Bacteria and fungus are some of our main compost superheroes. Surprisingly, like 80 to 90% of the organisms that do the decomposition are bacteria, which you can't even see. It's really quite amazing. They're the main like characters, and there's like in literally like a handful of compost, there'll be billions of microorganisms, but 80 to 90% of them are bacteria. And they're really involved, especially in the early stages of decomposition. Fungus is really important for the later stages when there's like woody materials and like harder to decompose things to break down. Yeah.
It seems a really dumb question, probably, but
No, they're impossible.
the organisms are in the soil.
Yes.
There's no soil in wood chips and the compost. Where do these come from?
Yeah, it's a great question. No, that's a yeah, exactly. There's like so many around us. It's a great question. When you're starting the composting process, to speed up the start, sometimes like at this compost facility, they might take a bucket of compost from a previous batch and mix it in with incoming material. Once you get going, you don't even need to do that. Like I know in Yellowknife, we didn't ever inoculate our pile. It literally, there's enough in amongst the organisms in the wood chips in the paper that it just happens. But it's a great question. It's kind of remarkable. Like to me, it's a little bit like magic watching these processes happen, especially because you can't see any of the organisms doing the hard work. But yeah, they're present around us, and it is quite remarkable, and especially how quickly it can happen, because the compost will heat up within a day or two. Like it really doesn't take long once you set up the right proportion of materials. I don't know if you've noticed, I noticed even in our 5-gallon pail at home, it takes a few days before we take it to the bin. It starts to get a little bit warm in there. So yeah, they're present amongst us. All right, so then we manage the active composting process. Basically, those materials are mixed together and we form them into long windrows. This is from the Yellowknife facility, this photo. My friend and colleague Micah is running the fire hose, adding water. So on the hot days in July in Yellowknife, when it gets dry, we would pour water in. We were spraying it with the fire hose, and then one of the staff from the city of Yellowknife would use the loader to lift up the material and turn it over, and that adds oxygen in. So those microorganisms are using a lot of oxygen, and you need to aerate it to let more oxygen in. And there's also, like, the loader is one way to do it. Some larger facilities, and I'm not sure if Sticklands have one of these, but they use you can also use a windrow turner, which is just a specialized piece of equipment that does the same thing. It lifts up the material and lets the oxygen in. And believe it or not, this process continues all winter long. We generate food scraps all winter long. It's no problem. You just take them to the compost facility and the process keeps on going. This is Yellowknife in January when it's not very hot. This day on the top, pardon me, the bottom right-hand photo here, it's probably minus 30 degrees out. I remember being at the compost facility and putting the compost thermometer in one day when it was minus 30 and it was 55 degrees Celsius inside the pile. It's really remarkable. There's enough, if you have a big enough pile, there's enough volume there and enough insulation, it can stay hot. If you're trying to do a backyard compost in the middle of winter there, it just freezes solid. It's not big enough to maintain its heat. But these bigger, like at a compost facility, and I know they're through the prairies even, there's been a lot of research around how big do we have to keep the pile to keep it warm through the winter months. And as we're doing the composting process, we need to monitor it. So to monitor how the process is going, I have a task for each of you to do. Can everybody stand up? And imagine if I brought in a big tray of like 100 hamburgers into the room. Everybody got 2 hamburgers, and now you do 10 jumping jacks. Everybody can do 10 jumping jacks. Or 5, or however many you want to do. Yeah. Now, what happens to the temperature? Thank you. Thanks for participating. What happens to the temperature in here if you all just ate 2 hamburgers and we kept doing jumping jacks? It would get much hotter in here. So the same thing happens in the compost pile. We have all these billions of microorganisms. They're moving around. They are eating all the food that's there. It gets hot, even though they're tiny, even though we can't see them. This, I don't know if you can see from back there, it says 70 degrees Celsius on that thermometer. So this is from Yellowknife. This was from in the summertime. But basically, in the composting process, you're wanting the temperature to get up between 55 and 70 degrees Celsius
for a set number of time. With these windrows, you want it to be at that temperature for 15 days, and you need to turn the compost windrow 5 times during the 15 days. And that helps you meet your requirements of high quality compost that then you can test. And then if the testing comes out good, you can sell it back to the public or give it to the public. So we test the temperature just to see how the process is going. This is a photo from the fall in Yellowknife. It's getting to be a cooler day, but you can see all the steam coming off the compost pile. So it really is remarkable how much heat gets generated. I visited a greenhouse in Vermont a number of years ago, and they were like taking that heat and using it to extend their growing season inside the greenhouse. So they had a compost pile set up and they were moving the heat into the greenhouse, which I thought was super creative.
So food becomes
Great question, Dave. You know what? This is the perfect point to ask that question. No, not that quickly. Great question. It's an excellent question though, because I was actually going to speak to this. There's a few products in the marketplace and people being told if you get this machine and you put it on your countertop, it'll make compost in a day. And that's just not true. It's not biologically possible. We've just spoken about all these microorganisms. They need to eat the food, they need to decompose it, and that takes time. So the initial stage of really hot in some cases can just be a few weeks. Even that temperature, you have to have it be that hot for at least 15 days. In many cases, Yellowknife, we'd let it continue for 3 or 4 months at those temperatures. And then we would cure it. So when you cure the compost, you're basically, the decomposition continues, the tin starts to become more fungus in the mix, the temperature comes down, it might be 40 degrees Celsius, it's not as hot, but the decomposition continues. So generally the rule of thumb for compost, it generally takes a couple of months to make high quality compost if you're managing everything very actively. If you're not managing it so actively, even in a place where you could have your own backyard composter, it might take a year. And that's okay. It just means everything is happening a bit slower, but it definitely can happen in a day. Some of the machines that are on the market, they can dehydrate the material and grind it up in a day or in 5 hours or 7 hours. It's just that material that comes out is not compost. That's kind of the differentiation. It's pre-treated material, which then there's different companies that have different suggestions for what you might do with that, but it's just not compost. Like that's the difference. And it's not something that's stabilized that you can put right into your soil, say with young seedlings right off the bat without giving it some time for that decomposition process to finish. So we let the compost cure for a number of months generally. In Canada, you're required under the Canadian Council of Ministers of the Environment to cure it for at least 21 days. So that's kind of the bare minimum, but often a facility would cure it for longer than that.
Water.
Great question. You generally don't need to. Yeah, because it's like slowed down so much and it's not so hot, it doesn't tend to get as dried out. That being said, if you had a curing pile and it got really dry and you were curious, like, is this done or not? You might want to add a little bit of water, because if you added water and the temperature went back up again, it would be telling you it's not done yet. Because sometimes if something gets really dry, it might cool right down, but it's not because it's done, it's just because it's too dry and the organisms don't have enough moisture. So yeah.
So does it cool off when it's done?
Exactly. Yeah. So they're not as active. There's not as many of them because there's not as much to eat. Yeah. Great question. And sometimes even like it could be a little bit above ambient temperature and you could consider it basically there. Some of the rules around, like if it doesn't go more than 8 degrees Celsius above ambient temperature, you can consider it basically done. Yeah. And so once you're getting to that stage, then at a compost facility, it's usually screened. So there's different types of screeners. You run the material through, it takes out any of those contaminants that might have made their way all through the process, like plastic. But also it's a way, if you've used wood chips, and the wood chips take a little longer to decompose, especially if they're bigger, you can actually reuse them. So you can just screen them out and reuse them again. They're a good way to bring some of those helpful microorganisms back into the process, back to the starting part again. And then you send a sample for testing. So you'll take a sample. There's a protocol around how to collect a really good representative sample of your batch of compost, and you send it away to a compost. Usually it's a soil testing laboratory, but that does specifically test compost. There's a specific protocol for how to do the test, and that compost will be tested for pathogens. So things like salmonella, fecal coliforms. It'll be tested for metals, so to make sure there's no contaminants in it. It'll be tested for sharps and foreign material, and provided it passes all those tests, and then it can be used for basically sold or given away for any use. There's 2 different categories. There's category A and category B. Category A can be used for anything. Category B might have some problems with it, but could be used for very particular applications. But any of the compost you're seeing at the store, or even that comes back to our community to use is category A compost. and then we can use it. So there's some photos in the middle. There's Amy Fournier from the town of Canmore at the compost giveaway in the spring. The other photos are from Yellowknife when we had our first community giveaway. You can see everybody out with their shovel. We had one lady come with her Land Rover, and she just got the bobcat to like pour the compost right into the back of her back of her Land Rover. It was pretty funny. And then we can use the compost. So we can use it at home in our gardens. It can be used in landscaping. It can be used for reclamation. The photo in the middle here is of the community school garden in Yellowknife. And then here's the community garden here in Canmore on the right. And then in the case of our organics that have gone to Stickland Farm, they get used right on the farm. So it's actually quite neat. Stickland Farm literally uses all of the compost that they produce on their farm. And so they're using it to improve their soil quality. And I just asked this week, I asked Edmund what they're growing because I was curious. So they're growing wheat, barley, canola, and peas. So it really made me think. I was thinking in our cupboard, I'm like, in terms of completing the loop, I was going to ask you at the beginning to try and figure out how these items I brought have anything to do with composting. Canola oil, a can of beer, a jar of flour, and some yellow peas. But by you composting, by you separating your organics and putting it into the bin, you are helping produce more food because it will be improving their soil quality at Stickland Farm, which will lead to more food production that can make our way back to the table, to our grocery stores or our homes to eat. So it's like you're part of that. It's like we're a big team in different places all working together to do the composting process and ultimately to support the soil health. So yeah, we've kind of followed this through the whole journey of starting out with our food scraps, all the steps all the way through to making food again. I thought I'd do a little add-on, just a very brief one. We've talked about the journey of the food scraps. I thought I'd do a brief add-on of how can we help more food scraps to make their journey to the composting facility rather than ending up in the garbage. And so I want to thank and acknowledge the town of Canmore for all the work they've done over the last few years, starting the residential compost program, following that up not very long later and in the middle of COVID with a commercial program. Thank you to all the residents of Canmore who've been diverting their food scraps. And actually to note, the neat wraps that are around the bins in Canmore, they were part of the town winning a Federation of Canadian Municipalities Award a few years ago for the startup of the organics diversion program. You can see here a photo of Mayor Borroman and Pascal Ouellette, who's a local artist. She was the person who did that super creative work. It makes me smile every time I go to the bin. The mountain views made out of food scraps. But yeah, it's neat that the town was recognized for that work. And then the photo here on the left is actually at Elizabeth Rummel School. They are part of the commercial program. They have 4 240-liter bins. They fill those every week, mainly with paper towel from their washrooms. So it's amazing all the different things that can be diverted through this program. And I know the town of Canmore did a waste characterization study last year, and that will be coming forward. So I think they're in the process now of looking at other opportunities there are within the community to increase even more than the amount of organics that get diverted. And then looking at Banff, Banff has had an organics diversion program for quite a number of years, for about 15 or so. In 2018, the town of Banff set a goal of 70% waste diversion by 2028. And then they set out a set of 10 different actions they were going to take to make their way towards that goal. When they started, their baseline would have been about 2018, was that they had about 37% diversion. And so they've already made their way to 52, which is actually really quick in terms of like the scale of the change required to make that. Like they still have a ways to go, but they've made a lot of quick progress. This is their waste dashboard on their website, so you can go check it out at any time and see how they're doing. They have mainly focused on making it more convenient for businesses and the commercial sector to divert, on regulatory changes. So in some cases in the commercial sector, making it mandatory and then enforcing that, and on education, really increasing the number of educational resources and tools and support for all of the different sectors to help. And I found they have a recent report, like a waste strategy report that came out just a few months ago in Banff. I found it really interesting to see some of their big wins. They have now in their budget every year, they provide some support to Banff Food Rescue, and that support has enabled Banff Food Rescue to expand its operation. Always we want to see edible food eaten by people and not ending up in the compost. I should have mentioned that sooner. That's always the best case scenario. Their support for food rescue and the expansion of the activities has led to a 300% increase in diversion of edible food from baseline, which would have been 2018. They added 43 residential food scraps bins, and that's led to a 200% increase in diversion in the residential sector. And then they've implemented and enforced mandatory food scraps diversion in the commercial sector, and that's led to a 97% increase in diversion in the commercial sector. I'm going to show you a couple of interesting, I find these interesting. Summer 2022 is on the left. So when we did the waste characterization study in Banff, this is what the garbage in the commercial sector, mainly from restaurants, looked like in Banff in the summertime. 61% of what was in the garbage was compostable, was food scraps. 3 or 4 months later, once the food scraps ban, like basically it was mandatory by the fall for restaurants to be participating in organics diversion, and it was being enforced. So the town was going around and checking, they're starting to give fines if people weren't participating, 32%. So this is a period of like 3 to 4 months. They went from having 61% of the garbage consist of 61% organics to 32%. So it's really remarkable. If a program is in place, it's easy to use, and you require it, it can really make a big difference. So I found that interesting, especially over such a quick time period. And now the town of Banff, where they're kind of headed next, they're continuing with all of those efforts. They also have a new zero waste action plan, and they're really now trying to focus on waste prevention with some really creative programs. So not only just diverting what's in the garbage, but let's prevent it from ever being there to start with and the town ever having to manage it. So at the moment, they recently, as of January 1st, have fully implemented a single-use item reduction bylaw. So in Banff, if you go to eat in at any restaurant, including fast food, and you sit down to eat, you are now required to be served on a China plate, China plastic, but something reusable plate with a reusable cup with reusable cutlery, and that has to get washed. They're still in the process, like there's still going to be a bit of process here. Some they're supporting, they want to support businesses first, but a lot are already on board. And so they're really trying to, again, the point that we don't just want a whole bunch of single-use compostable items that we have to manage. Whenever possible, we want the reusable items to be used. Acknowledging if you go in and you order takeout and you say it's to go, you'll still be served with your single-use items. But if you're going to sit in, that you're required to have reusable items. So it'll be really neat to follow what a difference that makes in their garbage profile. And then they've produced a lot of educational materials. So they've got great like labels that can go on bins for both the commercial and residential sector. They've got this great tool. It's called, this is used actually in a lot of different communities. It's just an online app. So basically what goes where tool. So if you're like, what the heck do I do with my bear spray or this shopping bag or you name it, you enter it in here and then it will come up with the answer and you press on it and they'll tell you where to take it in your community, which can be a really helpful tool because in daily life, you run into stuff where it doesn't always fit the clear box of where you should put it. And these tools really help. So an enormous thank you to all of you. Thank you to all of you for participating in diversion programs. Thank you to our municipalities for making these programs available. Thank you to residents who bring forward ideas for maybe what we could do next. These really are team projects, and I really appreciate all of the different roles that different people have. Go ahead.
Are there compostable bins in the campgrounds?
Great question. I'm trying to think in Banff. I don't know the answer to that in Banff. That's a good question. I know with parks, there are recycling bins in Banff. I'll have to ask my colleagues at the town of Banff what, if there are there. That's a great question because there's certainly a lot of people up there, like especially up in Banff at some of those campgrounds. Yeah. Yeah.
So with our urban, what I call consumer use bins, do you know if Canmore has a plan to increase the number of streams? Because currently you've got bottles, garbage, there's no compost bins.
Oh, sorry, say again.
So if you're at the bus stop, and there's the airproof lid, it's brown or blue.
Totally.
So people, people are lazy. So if you put a compost bin there, there's a better chance that there isn't one.
Then there isn't one, totally. And that's just a great question. I know in Banff, they've started having some compost bins in the residential, like street side, and more recycling. It's a complex one, and I get it. And they were aware in Banff when they put them in. It's hard getting people in public spaces like that to do it right. But you're exactly right. Without making it possible, there's no way for people to do it. I know actually in Banff's plan, the plan I showed there, they're really wanting to work more on that and see if there's ways to like, what are the things we can do to help people do it properly? Because it's, yeah. So I don't know. I can't speak for the town of Canmore. I'm not sure what plans they might have around that in that area. But it's a good point. Like always, generally, if you make something more convenient and you make it clear how to do it, there's a better chance of an item being diverted for sure.
Yeah, so we have a question online that I'm just gonna read. So the fact that we can add bones or even meat to the compost is great in Canmore. But so this person's asking, in places where you can't, what is the difference? And is it getting processed somehow different?
Oh, So if you're in a municipality where you can't put, yeah, and I should identify, like, here we can't do backyard composting because of wildlife issues, Canmore, Banff, obviously the Bow Valley. In many other communities, you can have a backyard composter, and generally meat and bones aren't recommended to go in your backyard composter. Not so much because they won't decompose, because they will, but they get smelly and they can attract animals, and it's just not great to have all the neighborhood dogs, and if you're in a place with raccoons and rats, if you live in a place with rats, have them come into your compost. So I would say, like, with commercial programs, it's generally community-wide programs for the most part, except meat and bones, because they're going to bigger facilities. I think you'd have to ask your own municipality, I guess, if that's not accepted. My guess is if it's not being accepted, you're being asked to put it in the garbage, I would imagine, but I wouldn't know according to the specific circumstance. Yeah. See, I just thought there was one question over here, but I didn't. Yeah, go ahead. That's a great question. I know I've seen those too, and I was glad to see those at some of the grocery stores. Basically, there's some like collection spots at our grocery stores where you can put in flexible plastic, which otherwise we're not able to recycle right now in our current community diversion programs. I sure hope they're making their way to be recycled. Certainly even flying pigs, like with the local contractor that collects from businesses, they take flexible plastic and it goes in to probably to Merlin Plastics or one of the plastics recycling companies in Calgary. I know at our household, we save it and send it to my sister who's in Edmonton, who can put it in her program. Like, there are communities that are larger and they're able to take it. One thing, as a very brief aside, so I hope the grocery stores are doing that. I don't know personally exactly. I would hope so. When you see them, they have it all together. So I would hope they may have some pallet wrap that they're already sending for recycling, and perhaps they include it with it, because it would be the same, I would think, the same type of plastic. It'd be great to ask them, because it's important to ask these questions, because it's amazing the places where the chain can fall apart, and it is important to ask that. So something coming soon, if you haven't heard, in Alberta, is something called Extended Producer Responsibility. So it's a provincial program. Very exciting, it's coming. That's already in place in many provinces in Canada. What it will mean is that soon in Alberta, we'll have a broader set of items that we can recycle. It will be the same across the whole province, and it will go to centralized recycling facilities. And we won't pay for it as municipal taxpayers anymore, because it will be paid for by the companies that introduce packaging into the marketplace. It's a great system. It's worked excellent in other provinces. They've had increased recycling rates, more materials that can be recycled, less burden on municipal taxpayers. So it's like a major win. It's just been, it takes time. It's such a change from what we've been doing previously. It'll be another, okay, it's not so long away now, about another year or so, and then you'll start to see the advertising for it and what that will mean for our community. But it's very positive. So things like flexible plastic, fingers crossed, will actually start to become recyclable here in our programs, hopefully. So yeah, here, and then I'll come to you, Joy. Yeah.
I started composting my leaves in the autumn and mix it with grass clippings. Yes. Obviously, I can't add fruit scraps.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering what kind of balance of soil is being produced, and if I need to add anything to it to improve the quality.
Yeah, and that's great, because that is something we can compost here locally. Like grass clippings and leaves you can do, because it's not a wildlife attractant in the same way. It's really interesting with that, like without seeing what you have happening, it's hard to know exactly. Generally, like wet grass clippings and dry leaves are a great combination. Your nutrient content won't necessarily be quite as high as if you were composting food scraps, just the nature of the material. But that should make a great compost that you can add into your garden. Yeah, your shrubs, your lawn. Totally. That's a great combination of materials, and one we can actually do here, which is awesome. So yeah, good question. Yeah.
That. We make compost at the Canmore Community Garden, just using the materials that we produce in the garden.
So great.
And we've had that compared to compost we bought in the past, and it actually, according to the results we got, scored better than the purchase compost. And that was just using carrot tops and leaves.
Yeah.
And grass.
That's awesome. That's super good to hear. And you might have enough. That's the thing with like the carrot tops and some of just the garden refuse that would really help as well. Because that is the thing, even when you purchase compost,
unless you really know what it's being made of, it could literally be grass and leaves from somewhere else. Like it's, unless you really know how they're doing it or what they're sourcing from. And that's awesome. You had it tested and were able to know that as well.
we have a couple on this.
Yeah. Oh man, that's perfect. So good. Go ahead, Joey.
Comment, two questions. We're the last province in Canada to consider surrenders responsibility. That's what I was. For sure. But my questions are, you identified Nova Scotia as a leader in this area. You identified where we are and what they are, so we can aim for something. Question two, I visited the large facilities in Niagara with my walker, but they cap the landfill sites, drill in, pull the methane, scrub the methane, produce electricity, goes to the grid. Why don't we do that?
Yeah. Oh, excellent questions, Joey. Let's see. Question one, I'm going to repeat it for the folks on here. Joey had two great questions. One is, thank you. Nova Scotia. So Nova Scotia, definitely the leader in waste diversion in Canada, have been for so long, and which I find amazing. Yeah, they've, group of people got things going there, and they've just continued going for it. They had to do research in waste diversion, really help a lot of other places ultimately because they're a leader. Yeah, so Nova Scotia, if I'm remembering correctly, they're in the order right now of 350 kilograms waste generated per person per year. Alberta is in the order of 1,000. So to give you a difference in terms of tonnage of garbage generated per person per year. Please don't quote me on that exactly because it's always changing each year, but it gives you a sense of the opportunity we have here. There's a lot more we could divert for sure.
2% waste diversion.
It will be real. Yeah, that's true. I don't know the exact percentage waste diversion, but yeah. So almost the inverse, even more so. Yeah. It's really remarkable what they've done there. And it's really, it's great. And it shows what is possible. Like there's no reason why we can't in time reach that here. So, and then the second question, good one around question around, there are many facilities in Canada where landfills have been capped and then the methane is pulled off and is used for electricity generation, for making clean methane, natural gas that gets used. So that does happen at some facilities. And actually, I believe the town of Canmore right now is exploring, could we move from taking our garbage to the current garbage landfill where there isn't landfill gas capture and taking the garbage to a landfill in the Calgary area where there is landfill gas capture, because that chart I showed, that would really change things in terms of from an emission standpoint. It's still always better if we can not send things to landfill that we don't need to send to landfill, obviously. But to the point of greenhouse gas emissions and what are the things we can do as a community, that certainly is something. And I think both the towns of Canmore and Banff have been exploring that. What would it cost? What would it look like? What would be involved in that? But yeah, so it is happening. I don't know, Joey, how many facilities in Alberta do that. I think probably one of the reasons we're taking our garbage so far is because it's cheap. I think that's probably, it was a decision made a long time ago and it was cost effective and that was the choice made. It definitely would be more expensive, I'm sure, to go to a facility that is capturing. But when we start looking at our greenhouse gas footprint, it would make a big difference.
There's landfills closer than
much closer than Camrose. Yeah.
How much is the closest?
I don't know. And actually I should help people understand. So that the facility near Exshaw, the Francis Cook landfill, it's what's called a class 3 landfill or a dry landfill. So we can't take food scraps there. It's in a sensitive environmental area. It's been set up to be a landfill that accepts construction, demolition, waste, dry, inert materials. In terms of a landfill that can accept all the different things, like including food scraps, there are some in the Calgary area. My guess is that might be the closest. Please, someone help me out if anyone knows if there's one closer, but I can't imagine between here and Calgary, none really come to mind that would be. And these now would be what are called engineered landfills. So they have a liner, there shouldn't be leachate, which is like the liquid that percolates through a landfill that is mainly caused by all these organics that end up in the landfill. But because in the landfill, because of the chemistry, the pH is very low. And so any metals that are in there tend to end up in the leachate. And if you don't have a liner, go into the soil. So new landfills now, back in the day, we didn't make landfills with liners that kept this leachate from going into the surrounding soil or water. But now we do, that keeps that out. And it also helps then in terms of having the landfill gas recovery if you've got liners. But yeah, there are closer landfills for sure. Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and I think there is a new compost facility in the works of being like created in the MD of Bighorn, I believe as well. I'm not sure where it's Gerard. Yeah, I'm not sure what stage he's at right now. I think so too. Yeah. So that one would be closer for sure once it's established.
Are there any studies comparing gas recapture landfill to energy generation systems? Or you just incinerate it and filter it?
Yeah, there will be studies on that. I certainly am not as, I can't speak to it a lot here. Actually, that tool I spoke about, that Environment Canada greenhouse gas calculator, like anyone, any member of the public can go use it, which is awesome. You know, there won't be like people breaking down the doors like the Parks Canada campground registration to go use it, but it is available and you can compare incineration on that. So if you wanted to look at the emissions, you can basically plug in a baseline and then all these alternative scenarios. And alternatives you can look at are composting, you can look at anaerobic digestion. Anaerobic digestion is the decomposition of organic materials in the absence of oxygen and then capturing the methane. And then actually the digestate that gets produced, you can then apply to agricultural land. So yeah, you can compare all those things. I don't know off the top of my head how they generally compare, but depends on each facility a bit. Yeah.
We produce a lot of plastic scraps, various shapes and sizes that aren't recyclable. And yet we throw them in our landfill where they can produce microplastics that float into the environment and streams and oceans. Would it make sense to have a dedicated landfill for microplastics? Not recyclable, but at least we can contain them so we can contaminate the environment.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. With landfills, like when all the material goes to the landfill and it's placed in the landfill, there's quite specific protocols around the liner so that material can't get out into the surrounding soil and cover. So generally, like when we talk about, I guess that's the thing, like even when I spoke about a biodegradable bag like this that just breaks into smaller pieces of plastic in the landfill, it won't really matter so much. As long as it makes its way to the landfill and ends up in the landfill is covered up, it won't be generating microplastics that go to the ocean. I think sometimes the issue with these biodegradable ones is if they end up in the environment, if this blows away or ends up not making its way into the garbage, then that's where it becomes a problem, because then it'll break into small pieces of plastic that then can make their way into the environment. Yeah. So
there are now studies that show microplastics in every organ of the human body and every corner of the earth.
Yeah.
And it's all a result of our.
yeah, absolutely.
So the problem is actually bigger than that.
Totally. Which is and I think is where this trying to get away from using plastic to begin with, where we can, like the trends are phenomenal. Like when you look at the projections at the moment are only for there to be more and more and more and more plastic. Like it's a major industry and it becomes tricky. Like there's a lot of ways we use plastic. It keeps food fresh sometimes for us. Like there's all these ways we've become accustomed to using it, but it's a major issue. Absolutely. And then
All the sorts of candy that's wrapped in plastic.
totally everything. Yeah.
Milk.
Yeah. Yeah. So much of it. It's hard to avoid it. Like even if you're trying, it's really hard to avoid it completely. Yeah. 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 That would be an interesting Earth talk, actually. It would be interesting that there's plastics. Yeah. Right.
Should, town of Banff, there were, what would you say, 70% corporate organics are diverted? Is that what you said?
Oh boy, I'm right.
It's like 250 tons, I think.
Yeah, I'm gonna go back to that. Wait, let's see here. Just in terms of what they're diverting. Sorry, lost my mouse here.
And we can put the slides out after and all of these links, so Shannon.
Were you thinking about this one, Wade? Is that what you were?
Back one more.
Totally. They're at for the whole community, so residential and commercial, they're at 52% diversion right now. Started at 37 in like 2018, and then now they're at 52.
I guess my point was, town of Canmore, I think was 30 tons of residential.
Oh, residential, yes.
Or it was-
No, you're right. Yeah, here, I'll go back to that. I know where you're at. Yeah, well, it's interesting. Yeah, on the resident. No, don't worry. I think that everybody's winning, they're just moving at their own, like, I think the communities help one another. So it's interesting from a residential perspective. Sorry, yeah, I'm just looking for, it's way back here. So right now, in terms of residential, Canmore is diverting more residential tonnage per month. So Banff is at about 18 and Canmore is at 30. Now we would have about 1.5 times the population of Banff, I guess. So I actually think it's actually probably quite similar on the residential side, which actually I think is really notable for Canmore because per capita we have fewer bins, and given how spread out our community is. So people are doing a good job. Like they're going some distance to take their organics to the bin. Yeah, hopefully they're doing the recycling at the same time, but Canmore is doing a they're doing a good job. I think the thing that I found really interesting, and part of this is the full implementation of their commercial, making it mandatory for the commercial sector to divert organics and then enforcing it, is this difference, is the 14, like almost 1,500 tons in a year. Sorry, 215 tons per month compared to 30 in terms of the restaurants, like the commercial sector.
And I
So
would think we have a similar number of restaurants. in
I
the end,
think
right?
so.
Like,
That would be my sense. Approximately, it would be similar. So there's just lots of opportunity here for the program to still be fully implemented. Yeah, but it's great. It shows the opportunity. Like there's a lot more that could be captured from the commercial sector here for sure. So
Thank you.
yeah, go ahead.
Do I understand right that our human solid waste is going to certain farms where pet solid waste is not?
Exactly. Yeah. Thanks, Dave. Yeah.
And that's because of that. And the choice about what goes in.
I think a choice about what goes in. Yeah. Yeah. Go
So
ahead.
that's the point that I-
Yeah, there's only so many things.
There's only one or two events in this community that do a decent job in waste diversion. Yet we have many more events than Banff. If Banff tries to do a far better job, in fact, moving towards right now, 20% of it cannot even be compostable. It has to be reusable and washed. So they're way ahead of this town.
Yeah, or wait.
We have to do it. We have a lot more events here, and then they pile of waste. I've seen truckloads of waste for the events that we have.
It's a great point, Joy.
We'd love to help.
But, and I feel like too, it's tricky, these things, isn't it? Because these are massive topics, and just doing our best as a community to keep moving forward. I feel like ultimately that's super important. And each having our roles, like bringing up ideas, working on things, giving support to our communities and our municipal governments when they do great programs. That because even anytime there's a new program, my guess is there's sometimes negative feedback. But when we want to see something and we support it and we give positive feedback, that can help as well.
Is there a compostable bin at this facility?
Yes, there is. Totally. This is one of the first like community facilities. And I know there's hand dryers in the washroom now, but before the hand dryers were in place, there was great signage and all the paper towels going to the compost from here. Yeah, great question.
You walk in the front door and it's on the right hand side. So
Yeah.
that you walk in.
Yeah.
Before the pump.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's great. It was really nice to have Elevation Place be one of the first places with a commercial bin because it's a place so many residents are coming to and seeing. And the farmers market in the summer has compost bins, and that all gets collected from the vendors.
So the green bins of futures that all fruit comes in at the farm stand, so they're not compost.
Sorry, say again.
The little green composted basket that your fruit is in at the farmer's market. The little white boxes. Yeah, the little
Oh,
boxes.
yes,
The
thank
cartons,
you.
so they're not.
I think those are not. I'm actually glad you brought that up because they kind of look like they could be. I think they are treated with.
They're treated with a lot of.
Maybe Hal can help me. I'm trying to think. It's a metal to keep them from decomposing. Yeah, I think. I'm sure if you put one in once, it's not going to be the end of the world, but you wouldn't want to compost a whole bunch of them. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm glad you brought that up, Now This is where the like what goes where. I mean, even the what goes where tool might not work for that particular one because it's so specific. But there are. Just in daily life, you run into these things. You're like, what should like a cork? What should I do with this? So for a cork, if it's actually made from cork, it can be composted. But if it's one of the plasticized, newer corks, it has to go to the garbage. As an example. Huh?
Yeah. But what's it do to you? You have a. I know they're-
Yeah. Absolutely. Do you know what, from a resource perspective, like the pizza box, I always think of as an example. Basically, paper products, if they can be recycled, there's more greenhouse gas and resource gains, like fewer greenhouse gases and more resource circularity gains by recycling. So if you can recycle something, go for that first. Like you don't want to stop recycling your paper and put it all in the compost bin. It'll compost just fine. It'll be no problem. But yeah, so that's why if you're feeling motivated, if you want to rip the top off and like recycle this part and then compost this part, it's great. Don't sweat it if you're not feeling it and you want to put the whole thing in the compost. Pat yourself on the back, you put it in the compost and not in the garbage and go about your day. But yeah, something like say tissue from blowing your nose, I would put in the compost because it's kind of soggy by that point. And then I would say soggy paper can go to the go to the compost. If you're ever having, I'm trying to think other ones. Yeah, but generally, if you can recycle it, like otherwise paper, if you can recycle it, that's a good option.
A level of sogginess. At that point with compost, or is it like 10%?
Oh my goodness, I don't know. Yeah, I would say if it's getting on the soggier side. I mean, the reality is it'll probably dry out somewhat, you know.
So like, would that be durable then? So if that were in the soggy one, if
Yeah.
that were in the recycling, would it not get recycled? Would it get rejected?
This one might still make it through. It's hard to know. I more just kind of go as a public education thing, you know, just say if it's greasy, put it in the compost. Yeah, it's a good point. Now, this one's not exceedingly greasy. It might make its way through. It might be okay. I feel like the poor people on the sort line trying to sort out what's good and what's bad. It's good to give them a hand. Like there's literally somebody there sorting out what can go and what can't. So you can do them a favor. If it's a little greasy, just put it in the compost and make life better for them too. So
They grind it up, they put it in a slurry, boil it up, they scum the plastic and the other stuff off the rest, and they dehydrate the water slurry into a paper product, and that becomes cardboard again. So any fats that are on there will come to the surface and get scummed off.
Yeah.
So I use the, if it touched your mouth, it touched food, compost, if it's still dry, recycle.
thanks, Joy. That's a good one. And it helps understand the why too behind it, hey, in terms of what's happening. Thanks.
You said hair is.
Yeah, yeah. So if you have pet hair, like you brush your cat or your dog or your own hair, I just brushed Edith's hair the other day and I put it in the compost. Yeah.
They say don't flush that down the toilet.
Oh, yes. That's because it'll tend to clog up your pipes. Yeah. It kind of gets in there with the toothpaste, and if there's any fat that's gone down the drain and creates these monster problems in the pipes that are fat balls that are really hard to. No, it's more trying to prevent clogging in the pipes. Yeah, I'm glad you asked that because it gets tricky. One thing too, like lint from your dryer, that should go to the garbage. So speaking of plastics, like you think there's so many of our clothes now that have synthetics in them. It's maybe way back in the day, maybe didn't have as many dryers then, but you could probably have put, you know, things from your clothes in the compost. But I would say now the lint from the dryer should go to the garbage.
Largest fatberg ever was the size of a yellow bus in London.
So crazy. We have someone from London here. Yeah. Oh, and it's very challenging. Actually, that's one of the things. The wipes, like if you ever buy, if they say they're biodegradable or compostable, it's not true. It's so unfortunate. Compost Council of Canada has actually like filed a claim with the Better Business Bureau of Canada. It's more than a year old because there's false advertising going on some wipes saying these are compostable. They are not. They haven't even heard back from them yet. It's such a problem in the marketplace. But if you have wipes, please put them in the garbage unless they have the logo somehow that says certified compostable. But I would those should just go definitely not down the drain because they cause the big clogs in the pipes as well. I know for a while, way back, Town of Canmore had a great little educational like cartoon online about not putting those things in the down the drain.
So I think we're kind of at the end of our time now. Thank you so much, Shannon. Let's give Shannon a round of applause.
Thank you guys.
Thank you for the conversation and questions, like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we just want to kind of plug maybe a few opportunities. If you're really interested in this, first of all, be sure to take a compost bin home if you don't already have one, or pass them to your neighbors. The Biosphere has also been involved with a bunch of green team and event diversion and waste management. We've got some green team volunteers here, and Joey's also been really involved with that. So if you're interested, stay tuned on our, I guess on our volunteer subscription list, or write your email down at the back. And we'll let you know about future opportunities, because we've had some really passionate, amazing volunteer teams that have gotten great diversion rates too. And we've just increased the compost so much, even as you mentioned, just this last week at the Nordic Center at the biathlon, and then as well at the cross country event last month. So yeah, and then also please join us next month. We're going to be here and with Naya and Michelle and their students. Timberline will be sharing about upcycling, which is again another waste reduction. So yeah, and oh, and then one last thing, there's the Reusable Cup program has launched in Banff. It's fairly new, the last few months. Muse is there, so if you go to Little Wild, Wildflower, Rimrock Resort, Sun Sally, or Downtown Sally, more to come. You can actually, you have to scan the QR code. It's totally free. You return the cup within 30 days, and you can help us increase the uptake of this really awesome trailblazing program. It's soon to come in Canmore as well, which is really exciting, and it really helps to have community support with that. So anyways, yeah, thank you so much, Shannon. Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Tanya.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting program.
Yeah.
It's awesome the work
It's-
by experience done on that.
Cool. Yeah, it's great. So anyways, yeah, thank you all so much. And thanks again, Shannon. This was really incredible. So yeah, thank you.